According to Tom Pelissero, the Detroit Lions are officially back to being active in this year's free agency, and that is re-signing wide receiver Tim Patrick. So let's get right into it. So yes, we have some Detroit Lions news, and just a day after on Instagram posting the picture of the shirt, basically saying he only wanted to be in Detroit, you guys pointed that out to me. A day later, he is now back in Detroit and re-signed. I don't know what the contract details are here for Tim Patrick. My assumption is this a one-year deal, but maybe it could be 2 years. I also don't know the price point. It was projected at $1.7 million, but I do know that Tim Patrick is set to be returning, which is great because from a needs perspective, based on the depth chart, this helps really round us out, leaves a lot of flexibility for the draft, and still continuing into free agency. But he also is a great fit for what we had this past season. And that's the key. I mean, we've kind of went through a lot of different number 3 or number 4 receivers over the last few years, DJ Chark, Josh Reynolds, and now Tim Patrick. But Tim Patrick fits really well, especially because of his connection he already had with John Morton. Though we didn't really see him much with Denver outside of the preseason for a little bit, with Denver, he was with John Morton because he was there the past 2 seasons before joining the Lions this past season. And he produced well with the Lions. Specifically in the second half of the season, there was about a 5-game stretch with Green Bay included. I believe Minnesota was included in there as well, where he absolutely took off. He was incredibly productive. His red zone production took off for the Lions, and he really got to that mark that we're used to seeing from that receiving role for the Lions. But he did it in his own unique way. It definitely wasn't the way that DJ Chark played as a whole or the way that Josh Reynolds played as a whole. He had his own little unique way to win, but there was also the aspect of as a deep dig threat, a guy that could get 25 yards down the field, break off the middle of the field, and be a big body receiving target for Jared Goff, just like Chark was, just like Josh was. Tim Patrick filled into that role perfectly as well. So from a connection perspective, this makes a ton of sense. You tie him back with Jared Goff, where he had a 94 passer rating when targeted, and also with John Morton, who I do think is going to expand some of the true one-on-one vertical shots, which Tim Patrick flashed this past season. He was capable of tracking the ball vertically downfield, winning off the line of scrimmage, utilizing his hands at the top of the route, being a physical receiver on the sideline. He flashed that ability. Remember the huge catch against Dallas? It was actually on Amani, where he made that fantastic grab on the sideline. He would flash that. And I think that maybe continue to be more utilized going forward with his large catch radius, back shoulder potential attempts that we'd have to go back to John Morton since the last time we've seen that. So I think from a fit, this makes a ton of sense to bring Tim Patrick back, the 6'4", 212-pound receiver that is now 31 years old. Now, like I said, production was really solid this past season, nearly 400 yards receiving, 33 receptions. But I think the key is this receiver room as a whole took off last year, and all these guys are essentially back under contract now. This receiving room as a whole was going into week 18, arguably the best receiving group in football against man coverage, which is a huge step versus where, this all began, where they had struggles against man coverage going back to 2022. Last season, it was the best in football. There's a lot of factors to that, but mainly it's the weapons that you have. And while Tim Patrick wasn't the driving force of that, I would actually argue that he was better against zone coverage and allowed him to fit in and have a unique role that actually worked perfect because you had lost a high football intelligence player in Josh Reynolds who understood stacks, understood spacing underneath, and Tim Patrick had to kind of create his own lane to be effective in a similar type of role, but a little bit different. And I think he did that. Number one, the Ryans really lean into the underneath level 1 usage, especially against zone coverage. His run after catch ability was on complete display, which is something that I think he brought better than Chark and or Josh Reynolds brought to the table. He averaged over 4 yards after the catch, and I think that's where he shined. We even saw it on some of the level 2 passes that he caught. It's that ability to quickly transition, quickly get upfield, and it was also the element of what he did on broken plays. That's something that we really didn't notice and done at all with Jared Goff just in general. With Tim Patrick, that actually became a real threat. I mean, early in the season, you had the drag route that turned into a touchdown. Then as the season progresses, you have the touchdown against Buffalo. It's a broken play. Goff just finds him out on the sideline, and he trusts him to get open underneath. And he's such a big body target that is such a unique weapon to have. A guy that's 6'4" that's really good after the catch. That way, when he's working so many routes within 5 yards, it's very easy for the quarterback to find him. It's almost like a tight end, but he has some of that receiver athleticism to him. It's a really nice mesh point between what he can bring to the table. So him being brought back makes a ton of sense for me. And there's a lot of things that we liked about Tim Patrick this past season. Number one, he didn't really drop the football. He had some issues with that in the past. Nothing that I ever thought was very concerning, but this past season had 0 registered drops according to Pro Football Focus in the regular season. Now, he unfortunately did have one in the playoffs, and even though I don't feel like his pass catching technique is softest in terms of his hands when he's trying to high point passes or catch passes that are away from his frame, I don't even think he's maybe the loosest receiver in terms of the entire catch radius. We know that he's really long. He didn't really drop passes for us this past year. So that's step one, be reliable. And he was that. And he was kind of the safety valve in a lot of ways. I felt, as mentioned, he kind of opened up his ability to separate when as a red zone target, which is something that coming out of the draft, even though he wasn't drafted, he was a UDFA out of Utah, something that when coming out, it was thought it was going to be a big element of his game. And I think that came along when he showcased his ability to win off the line of scrimmage. And he has such a big radius that if you have a quarterback that can just get it in the vicinity, if you have a quarterback that's pretty accurate, he's typically going to have a spot that you can put the ball. And when everything shrinks when it's inside the 5-yard line, he had a way to win. Now, it wasn't just back shoulder fades, even though he may be capable of that. It was slant routes. It was the ability to get off the ball with quick feet, with some lean and some bend to his game. And then it was the route discipline through the top where he could utilize his hands, but he could also at the same time be disciplined and detailed to beat press coverage and not really give away the tell of where it's going. He had a lot of nuance that he would add to it within a physical frame that was really hard to knock off at the top of the route. Now, I definitely think there's limitations here, and I already mentioned a few of them. I don't think he beat level 2 man coverage incredibly well either. Like, you'd see guys kind of just step in front of his routes. We saw it against Chicago, off man coverage. Guys could kind of detail it up because I didn't think there was a ton of change of pace there. I also thought they became a little bit rounded, right? His burst ability wasn't fantastic either. The stop-start explosion has never really stood out for me with him. I think that gets him in trouble sometimes against zone coverage as well. A little bit easier to kind of pace where his routes are going to go. But for the Lions, they ended up finding a role that fit perfectly for Tim Patrick, and he was perfect for us this past season. And with John Morton now here as our offensive coordinator, to me, it just makes too much sense to bring Tim Patrick back, especially as we know he wanted to be back with the Detroit Lions. So I'm happy to have him back. So yes, Tim Patrick is resigning. We'll figure out all the contract details a little bit later here. But for now, welcome back Tim Patrick to the Lions as free agency continues. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. And I'm out.